I want to bring in now Sarah McNamara, who's the Chief Executive of the Australian Energy Council. Thanks for joining us, Sarah. I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining in my documentary last night when we were looking at nuclear power. I'll come to that in a moment. In a nutshell, what the Prime Minister announced today is that the electricity sector will get rid of virtually all of its emissions. More than 95% of the emissions from electricity will go. How will your sector do that?
Well, our sector is already on the pathway to decarbonisation, Chris. Over the last decade, we've reduced our emissions by around 20%. And by 2030 alone, the electricity sector is likely to have reduced its emissions by around 50%. So that trajectory will continue through to 2050. But what we think is really important about this milestone announcement the federal government's made today is that it will open up conversations with other sectors of the economy which have yet to make a real contribution to our emissions reduction goals, so we can start talking about the contribution they might make to complement the kind of efforts the electricity sector is making already.
Yeah, we'll come to some of those later in the program. We'll talk about agriculture, but one of the other sectors you'd be alluding to there is transport. And for transport to reduce emissions, there's going to have to be greater use of electricity. So you're going to actually have to generate more electricity without increasing your emissions. You talk about getting to 50%, the cuts to 50% in electricity. Presumably that is still by rolling out large-scale solar and wind energy?
Well, I think there are two main factors which mean we're going to meet that target in 2030. The closure of the Yallourn power station is one of them, and the introduction of what's called the New South Wales Electricity Roadmap, which is going to underwrite a lot of new renewables generation in New South Wales. Both of those things are the main contributors to a real reduction on emissions around the 50% mark by 2030.
Yeah, so we're talking about shutting down more coal-fired power stations in the Hunter Valley and in Victoria. What are we doing to make sure that there's enough security of supply if you get renewables up to close to 50%?
Well, we're not anywhere near 50% yet, and we do run a grid that is multifaceted. It has a lot of moving parts, and market participants work 24/7 with the market operator to manage the very delicate balance we need to strike to ensure that the lights stay on at all times, that we don't have to deal with blackouts.
Yeah, but it's been a pretty tenuous business so far. We've had problems certainly in South Australia, and we've had brownouts in Victoria as well. Those problems are going to increase, and energy storage is still the unsolvable problem, isn't it?
Well, we did have a blackout in South Australia back in 2016, but that was really the result of a number of different factors which would be now unlikely to be repeated. It is true that it is a delicate system, but the system operator and market participants work really hard every day to make sure we don't encounter the kind of problems that we'd see that would result in blackouts.
Yeah, but it gets more and more complex, of course, the more intermittent power you put into the system. And is there a country in the world that, apart from those countries that are blessed with massive amounts of hydro energy, is there a country in the world that has been able to operate effectively on more than 50% of its energy share coming from intermittent renewables?
Well, it depends. Do you mean 50% renewables all the time, Chris, or just at a point in time? Because I'm not aware that any countries are at that point yet, but we don't need to be. I mean, at the moment, renewables make up about 25% of our energy mix. We're expecting that percentage to increase over time as we see more investment in renewables and also more investment in the kind of storage technologies we need to be able to store renewables and back up those times when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining.
And what are they? Because it's not batteries, is it? Are you talking about more hydro, more pumped hydro?
Well, we will see Snowy 2.0 being built in the coming years, and there are other smaller pumped hydro projects to come online as well. But there's no silver bullet solution to supporting our electricity system. There are a lot of moving parts in our system. It is a delicate balance, and we are actually getting that mix right, and we'll continue to. But we are in the middle of an energy market transition. It is inexorable that we are on the march towards a lower emissions future with lots more renewables coming online. That doesn't mean there isn't a role for coal and gas-fired generation for the next couple of decades. In fact, coal and gas make up around 65% of our electricity generation. So they're going to continue to play a strong role over the coming decades as we reduce emissions elsewhere.
All right, I mentioned that I interviewed you for the documentary Going Nuclear that aired last night. I also interviewed the Resources Minister, Keith Pitt. Here's what he said about the political problem of going nuclear.
It takes a very significant strategy. It'll take a lot of political courage and leadership. And look, unless there is bipartisan support, I just don't see that happening.
Well, Keith Pitt there, obviously he wants to at least test nuclear energy, but he's pessimistic about bipartisan political support. He's now in Cabinet. There are other people in Cabinet who support exploring nuclear energy. If we're talking about a technology roadmap, and if we're talking about a secure, developed economy being low emissions into the future, do we need to at least get rid of the legal impediment to nuclear energy and actually consider it as part of our future mix?
Look, I think that getting rid of the legislative impediments to considering nuclear, we should definitely do that. That's kind of a bit of a no-brainer. But the reality of nuclear generation, introducing it into an economy that has no existing nuclear energy, is going to be an extremely expensive exercise. It'll take decades, and it will involve the development of a very complex regulatory framework to secure it, all for the production of a generation source that is about as inflexible as coal is. So as much as nuclear has been a really great contributor to electricity generation in Europe in particular, they have an existing industry over there that they're able to build on. We have a community lack of social licence here for nuclear, but really, even if we were able to overcome that legislative and community hurdle, it's the cost issue and the suitability of the technology itself which is lacking at the moment to present itself as a solution for our system.
All that excess energy overnight could be making hydrogen, but we will see. Just finally then, Sarah, you're telling us that, that electricity users in Victoria and South Australia won't be facing electricity shortages this summer, no brownouts this summer?
We work very hard with the market operator every year to make contingency plans for days and times of the day when we are likely to experience very high demand, to guard against a situation where we would see homes and businesses experience a blackout. We haven't had any big challenges for a while. We'll be meeting the challenges this summer again, and at the moment we don't anticipate there being any issues with that.
Great stuff. Thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.